Rural Heritage on RFD TV is brought to you by Rural Heritage Magazine, a bi-monthly magazine featuring articles about farming and logging with draft animal power, small-scale diversified family farming and homesteading, and other aspects of our rich rural heritage. Rural Heritage Magazine, borrowing from yesterday to do the work of today. For subscription information, please call 319-362-3027 or order online at www.ruralheritage.com.
My name is Mark Hyman. I live in Dike, Iowa. My wife and I have been in this area for 45 years or so. Originally came to Dike teaching school.
Okay.
Taught for 3 years, and then because of family, had to find something that was going to be a little more financially rewarding. So I did a short stint at John Deere, and then I spent 40 years with Roskamp, became CPM, part of CPM, an equipment manufacturer building machines used for primarily grain processing in the early days, animal feed.
Okay.
So it was a natural fit for Iowa, and it was a great career for me. God blessed my wife and me through all of that, so that when I retired and I told her I wanted a building, I wanted a place to put my equipment and a place to display my chainsaws, she was good with that. There was an empty lot. We were able to build the building from the ground up, and here I am today. We had always supplemented heating with firewood in the home that I grew up in near Rock Creek Lake in Iowa. And so chainsaws were just a natural. When we were in our first home, we had a wood burning stove. When we moved to our present home here in Dike, we had a wood burning stove, later wood burning furnace. So always had chainsaws around. My older brother was collecting chainsaws, and it sort of interested me. But I was at the point one day where I had 3 working chainsaws and 1 collectible. I said, I'll give him the collectible saw, and that's all I'll ever need to do. But I didn't. And as a result, now I have all of this, including all of the saws that used to be in his collection. Unfortunately, he passed away from cancer a couple of years ago. And before he left, in order to clean things up, we went down and we got everything that was at his place. So, and that's how it happens. You just get started, and there seems to be no end. We had McCulloch chainsaws at home growing up, and so that was my early focus. Discovered the internet, discovered eBay, and looking for an old saw like I used to have, found something. Was introduced to a couple of different chainsaw websites, led me to look for some bigger McCulloch saws, some that were, for example, this Super Pro 125 was the biggest one-man saw that McCulloch ever built, and they were, even 15 years ago, fairly highly sought after as a big muscle saw. Some guys would drive an old muscle car and they'd keep it in the garage and fix it up. I've got chainsaws. Sharpen chains, make chains. I've got a pretty extensive inventory of chains in all kinds of sizes, a lot of things that are hard to find today, and particularly things that aren't very popular in this region. So people with vintage saws are able to come in and we can fit them up with a chain that works, which it's a nice little service to be able to offer.
Sure.
I've also been collecting McCulloch parts,
Okay.
Probably for nearly 20 years, actually. So shops that are going out of business or lots that come up on eBay, et cetera, I have a pretty good inventory of McCulloch parts. It's broad, it's not particularly deep, but I do have a lot of things. And there's one other fellow out in Virginia, his name is Max Rao, who is very active selling parts through Facebook and through eBay, and Max and I help each other out with parts. If I have something he needs or he has something I need, and then we not only keep each other supplied, but we're also doing our best to keep the the enthusiasts out there supplied
Right.
with parts.
Right.
When my old McCulloch saw finally failed, age, corrosion, abuse, etc., I bought a new Johnsrud chainsaw in 1981. And so in the back of the room, I've got a growing collection of Johnsrud. Right here, I've got 6 cutaway Johnsrud saws that were done by the Johnsrud factory in Sweden. These were in a dealership up in Dresser, Wisconsin. And when he got to the point where he just didn't have a place to display them any longer, he would contacted me, would you be interested in putting them on display in your museum? And of course, I'm absolutely thrilled to have them here. So.
Sure. Yeah, that's terrific. So it's to show people how they work.
Absolutely, yes.
How they operate, yeah.
And in incredible detail. They all turn over. Several of them, the ignitions still work.
Really?
You can see starters, clutches,
Wow.
you know, the piston, even exhausts are cut away, the oil pumps are cut away. Just wonderful pieces to have. People come in and say, you know, are you willing, are you able to work on older saws? And the truth is I prefer that.
Sure.
Because you don't need a lot of sophisticated bothered equipment to do that. And I'm familiar and becoming more familiar all the time with various models of the vintage saws. So I keep doing it. Sometimes I spend way too much time doing that, but it's interesting. It's interesting to learn.
Sure.
You see a lot of things that different companies did in similar fashions, but you also see how different companies address problems in very different ways. McCulloch first produced a chainsaw with an all-position carburetor. That was a tremendous first for the industry, and something that ultimately everybody doesn't even think about anymore.
Right.
But they were the first ones to come up with the diaphragm all-position carburetor so that you could use the saw overhead, on its side, et cetera, et cetera. Up to that point, you either had to rotate the transmission and the bar, or rotate the carburetor, or somehow to keep the engine operational, going from a felling cut to a bucking cut.
Right.
But McCulloch led the way in that regard. They were also ahead of most of the industry in their die casting technology. Robert McCulloch started his business in Milwaukee in the 30s, building superchargers and engines for midget racers.
Okay.
And then moved to California, seeing the opportunity. He went to college, went to school at Stanford, liked the weather, liked the environment, saw the opportunity for growth, so they moved out to California in the early 40s. And his first business, or one of his first businesses, in addition to the superchargers, were building the drone engines. So that's a 4-cylinder, horizontally opposed, 2-stroke drone engine that they would build and sell to a company like Radioplane, who built drones that were used, among other things, training fighter pilots back during World War II. So when he was also at that time building engines for Reed Prentice, who was another manufacturer building chainsaws.
Okay.
When that contract expired, they figured we know something now about building chainsaws, engines at least. So they began to build their own chainsaws. And you know, from kind of humble beginnings in the early 1940s, they were the first manufacturer in the world to build 1 million, to build 2 million, to build 3 million
Really?
chainsaws.
Okay. I'll be darned. Okay.
I think the oldest is a 2-man model up here, which was actually the first model that McCulloch built, their Model 549 that started in 1949. So that's the oldest McCulloch saw. And the very first saws, like the 2-man saw, did not benefit from the all-position carburetor. So on a 2-man saw, the engine has to remain horizontal and the transmission and bar will rotate to make the felling cuts.
And that's primarily what they're used for. You don't buck a lot with the two-man saw.
Well,
Or you have big timber maybe.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a practical firewood saw by any means, but for big logs, certainly a two-man saw would have an advantage over a two-man hand saw.
Okay, yeah, right.
The Titan Blue Streak that's up here is actually the oldest saw that's in the building right now. That belongs to a fellow by the name of Bob Becker, who lives down in Grundy Center. And after he got it cleaned up and operational, he didn't want to carry it back down to the basement. So he wondered if I'd have a place to display it, and I'm really happy to have it here.
Yeah.
Being in California in the early 40s and continuing on, there was a huge opportunity for the big saws, the big commercial
Sure.
timber harvesting saws.
Right, with those western forests.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And, fast forward 30 years, 70s into the 80s, the industry changed, and McCulloch had a little bit of trouble making that adjustment.
Okay,
Robert McCulloch sold the business, I think, around 1974 to Black & Decker, who focused on commercial saws, homeowner type
I see.
things,
Retail.
consumable,
retail saws.
retail, and frankly, disposable. When I started, I didn't know any of this, of course.
Okay.
I knew Dad had a yellow McCulloch saw, and I wanted one. So, you learn more and more, and you can see it reflected in the machines. The earliest models were designed in such a way that they could be rebuilt sometimes several times and continue to be operational. The modern saws are used. If you abuse them or get damaged once, then typically it's more economical to throw it away and start over than it is to invest a lot of time and money in making repairs, particularly for the commercial grade machines, not the industrial.
You must have some interesting saws that are very unique.
Well, I do actually, and back in those early days when the chainsaws were coming on, Cummings, not Cummins, the diesel, but Cummings Machine Works out in the East Coast was trying to develop a mechanized saw based on the current technologies that they were familiar with.
Okay,
So there you see the circular saw blade, four-stroke engine, shaft, and a clutch mechanism. And while it was a mechanized saw, it was not very successful. Just down one shelf lower, Mall Tool Company in Chicago area were building electric tools, and they got into the chainsaw business. The small E12 is a little 110 volt, one-man electric model chainsaw, very early. Next to it is a pneumatic saw that would run off a large engine-driven compressor.
so you'd have a hose running to it.
Yes,
And this one you'd have a power supply running to it.
exactly.
Wow.
The next one is a two-man electric saw, again, built by Mall Tool Company. So those are all fairly unique. And then Mall started building gasoline. So hanging from the ceiling is a Mall Model 11 two-man gasoline-powered chainsaw.
It's a monster.
And Mall was a very good equipment manufacturer. Their saws rivaled the Titan models in terms of power output, wood cutting ability. Mall eventually was purchased by Remington at a time when ammunition sales were low, and Remington was getting into the chainsaw business.
Okay.
So for a period there were Remington Malls, and then they were Remington chainsaws, and then later when ammunition sales picked up again, chainsaws went by the way. So those are interesting. One of the probably more fascinating pieces is this Comet Model B. The Comet was made in Sweden, near the town of Jonsered, Sweden, which is the home or was the home of Johnsrud chainsaws. The Comet is a diesel, or at least a compression ignition engine,
Okay.
and not a spark ignition, so not a gasoline-powered saw. I was able to acquire this saw through the internet. Messages pop up, somebody says we have this available, you trade a few messages, and in this day and age, the guy says, I'll send you the DHL packing slip and you send the money by PayPal.
Wow.
And like that, it appears. It has been run, although it's never out in the woods harvesting firewood, it has been run, and they told me they would run it on a 50-50 mixture of mixed fuel, gasoline with the two-stroke oil, and diesel fuel.
Huh, okay.
So, but it is compression ignition. The handle is actually a propane tank, and this is the propane tank to refill the handle. There's a burner on the head, so you warm the engine up, and then this doesn't even have a recoil starter. You wrap the rope around and pull it over and start the saw. And we're told they used to demonstrate these out in the field, start the saw up, warm it up, make a few cuts, take it over, switch it off, dump it in a barrel of water, pull it out and restart it to demonstrate to everyone how wonderful the compression ignition engines were. That's known as a bow bar or a circle bow. And a fellow by the name of Claude Poulin gets most of the credit in the Americas anyway for the development of that. That, of course, is Poulin, who was responsible for the Poulin chainsaw brand. Apparently, during World War II, watching some German prisoners of war bucking woods for the paper mill, he saw them struggling, lifting the logs and cutting them, and the saws pinching and all that. So the idea of the circle bow is that the inside of the bar is narrower than the outside.
Okay.
So you
just
hook
wedge.
the spike on the log. As you are bucking through the log, even if the log is supported on the ends, you can cut through without pinching and then pull the bar out.
Okay.
The other advantage is you don't have to bend over.
Right.
So you can do all of that basically from a standing position, hook it on the log and buck it through. So that at least is how the bow saw was primarily used in North America anyway.
Good morning. I'm Dave Wilgerby, New Richland, Minnesota, and welcome to my little chainsaw collection. I've been cutting and burning firewood for 44 years, and I started out with one Johnsrud chainsaw, and I'm still using that same saw right here. I bought that 44 years ago and been cutting wood with that ever since. And about 10 years ago, just before I retired, I came across a couple of chainsaws that somebody wanted to get rid of, and it's like, oh, these are kind of fun to fool with. So I've kind of gotten a little crazy since then, and I've picked up chainsaws from garage sales and auctions, and people bring me chainsaws, and I really enjoy it. I'm been retired for 8 years now, and I spend a lot of time in this old shed out here and working on my chainsaws, trying to get them running, cleaning them up, and I like the oddball ones. There's some you just don't see. There's an Indian chainsaw down here that I'm looking for parts for. Those are real hard to come by. The biggest one I've got right now is this big maul here.
Yeah.
I've got several more of those down there with the bars off.
I see.
But this, you could put a helper handle on the end of this, so it could be used as a two-man saw. This is an old Maul electric here.
Yeah.
Great big old monster. There's
yeah.
another newer electric up here. This is a David Bradley. This is probably from the 1960s.
Okay.
There's different Remington, and there's a couple other companies that made them, but made a chainsaw with an electric start on it.
Oh, really?
This one isn't complete. I'm missing a cover here and everything, but you hook it up to a battery and start it electrically. Boland's made mostly lawnmowers and things like that, and then for a while they made a chainsaw. This little yellow one up here is Cox.
Oh, wow.
This was a company that made little airplane engines for radio-controlled airplanes.
Okay.
And for a short while, they tried making a chainsaw. Didn't go over real well.
It's got more of a pistol grip on it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Here's a chainsaw that says Ford on it. Ford never made a chainsaw, but at one time, if you bought a new Ford tractor, you got a chainsaw with it.
Really?
These are kind of desirable because there's not a lot of those were made.
Sure.
This company was Olson and Rice from California. They made chainsaws for themselves, and they put their own name on them. They made them for Ford. They made them for Sears. And then there was several other companies that bought chainsaws from Olson and Rice. The black powder splitting wedge for splitting wood.
Wow.
We used this a number of years ago at my father-in-law's place, and the great big rounds of wood that are too big to wrestle up onto the wood splitter, you pour black powder down this hole, then you take some newspaper and cram it down there like a wad. You pound this into the piece of wood, into the stump or whatever you want to split. Put a piece of dynamite fuse in here and light it up and get the heck out of the way because you don't know where the chunks are going. Well, I started out with a couple of friends, and we were into the old hit and miss gas engines, and we started going to the thrashing shows and the tractor shows, and we had tractors in parades, and we had engines on trailers that we'd pull through parades and all that, and we kept getting bigger and bigger engines. We started out with some small ones, you know, the little Maytags, and
Right.
pretty soon we had some great big monster 8-horse engines. And to load them all up and get them to one of these shows for the weekend, keep them running for the weekend, and then haul them all home again on Sunday was a real chore. It was a good time, and we went to shows all over southern Minnesota, some in northern Iowa. And then this friend of mine got cancer and died. We sold off almost all of the engines and had a couple tractors. We kept those for a while, but as I got older, I don't have the place to put all this big stuff. So it's like, this is something, you know, that you can still find the chainsaws. They're still around. Not real expensive. Sometimes I've gotten them given to me.
Sure.
So I can pick them up at auctions sometimes for $5 or $10 a piece. But I can load up my trailer with 20 chainsaws and go to a show like Farming Yesteryear in Keister for a couple days and come back home, and a couple hours to load it all up, a couple hours to unload it, and have a good time doing it. And people come around and, oh yeah, my dad had a chainsaw like that. And I can remember when I was little, you know, my dad.
This program is available for purchase. To order your copy, please call 319-362-3027 or visit www.ruralheritage.com. Rural Heritage is a bi-monthly magazine dedicated to draft animal farming and logging, as well as other aspects of our rich rural heritage. It is published by Mishka Press, which also offers a complete line of Back to the Land books, DVDs, and calendars. Call or write for a catalog or subscription information, or visit our website at www.ruralheritage.com.